for accepting this abstract. For those of you who know Beatrice, it's not me. Beatrice Ekesa is one of our nutritionists. She's based in Uganda. She's Kenyan. And she requested that I present this on her behalf, National Food Data Conference. So this is a study that was funded through the Drivers of Food Choice, and it's looking at the effect of land ownership on agrobiodiversity and dietary diversity over 20 years ago. And for reasons of land tenure, and I apologize that I don't know all the full details about the land tenure system in the area, but if you're interested in that, this is to tell you that this research is going on, and I would very much encourage you to contact Beatrice. Most of the farmers in the area are smallholder farmers, and the reason why the study was done is to, based on the premise that, of course, land is fundamental to our ability to have agriculture and feed ourselves, even though we know there's more vertical agriculture and other innovations going on. And the perception that land security will enhance a farmer's investment in their long-term development and stewardship of the land. That's the main hypothesis. And when they have long-term land security, they will enhance their investment into the land and make better land use choices. And then this will lead to them having a more diverse diet. So that was the basic hypothesis. In terms of the background of the farming and food systems, they are, of course, mainly smallholder farmers and cultivating a range of diverse crops, actually quite a lot of diverse cereal and root and tuber crops. And then cotton is a major cash crop in the eastern region of Teso, and other crops such as ground nuts, sesame, beans, and sunflower are important in the northern region. The nutrition situation, the stunting is higher in Acholi than it is in the Teso region, and there are some differences notable between the two areas. And vitamin A deficiency is 38% for children and 19% for women. And at the time of I guess this is national data, 14% of children met minimum dietary diversity, which is of course not very high. So basically there was a sampling procedure put in place, and in the end 1,280 households were sampled out of 32 different villages. And the methods that they used were a Likert scale for household land insecurity. So it's based on the respondent telling the enumerator how they felt about their land ownership. We did an agrobiodiversity assessment and a dietary diversity assessment. Since, at least for me, land tenure question is very new, I wanted to at least give you an example. So the respondents were asked these 13 questions, to which they responded, I agree, or I neither agree or disagree, or I disagree. So you either agree or disagree, or basically don't know or don't say. So for example, the questions were, this land has been owned and controlled by me and my family for many years. I would agree or disagree. There are no disputes in my family on the community in relation to my land. You agree or disagree, and so on and so forth. So they came up with a score for land tenure security. And what we found from these two areas under the study were that the majority of households, 80%, according to this 13 question score, consider themselves to be land secure. So only 20% felt that they had insecurity of land, which is interesting in and of itself. And a lot of this was about their agrobiodiversity use and their dietary diversity according to their land tenure status. So we looked at the number of crops that they grow on farm, and the average was 3 to 4 crops. It was slightly higher for the land secure, 61%, than the land insecure, 55%. That's growing more crops. So fewer crops were grown if you were on a land insecure area. But then in terms of which crops they grew, I really don't think there are too many differences. In the land insecure, they tend to grow more maize than they do in the secure, so that's definitely a result that we could look into more. But amongst the other results, there weren't many striking differences, and I'm sorry there's no test of significance on this table. So Beans also seem to be grown a little bit more by the land insecure, but there might have been some definitional problems because cowpeas and green gram, for example, are more in the secure. So I don't know that we draw too many conclusions about what they're growing based on their land tenure status, self-assessed. And what was interesting, though, was that the rearing of animals was very different. So if you were land secure, you had more cattle, or more percentage of households had cattle, not the number, but just the percentage of households having cattle, and goats. And then the rest of the livestock were more or less similar. More pigs if you're insecure. So larger livestock was observed among the households with more land security. Okay, so let me go a little bit more quickly. In terms of the agrobiodiversity assessed, there were 275 unique species that the populations could report. And the table shows you the percent of households claiming to use one of those 257 species. So overall, 69% of households were using a plant species, 41% using an animal species, 12% using an insect, 8% for bird and aquatic. There really didn't seem to be, well, there were too many differences between the secure and insecure use of agrobiodiversity, which also is another interesting conclusion, because you could hypothesize that the more insecure might need to rely more on wild species, but this didn't seem to be the case. Also, similarly, dietary diversity of children was very similar amongst the insecure and secure, but what's striking is that's very low. So keeping in mind the national average was about 14%, this is lower. 8% of children met minimum dietary diversity. And for women, again, not too many differences between the land secure and insecure. A little bit worse for the insecure, but there was no test of significance, so we'll have to do that. However, the difference between the children and the women is what really struck me when looking at these results, so we would definitely want to investigate that more. This is about the different food groups that the women were meeting. Of course, as we always see, the common food groups are roots and tubers, in this case in Uganda, as well as cereals and pulses, and then much less consumption of animal source foods, pulses, fruits, nuts, eggs. And of course, as you go up on your dietary diversity score, those foods become more common. My time's up. So there was a lot of agrobiodiversity known, but underutilized, the common finding that we see. Only small differences in reliance on wild foods by land tenure status, and it was dependent on which food category, plants or animals or insects. The dietary diversity of children was much lower than for women in both the situations, so I think this requires further investigation. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah, I think your study, madam, it reinforces the age-old knowledge that we have that